Reconciliation. Introduction. In Canada, the term Truth and Reconciliation has been retained as a result of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, TRC, as a means to describe a hoped-for process in which Canadians share and hear stories of Indigenous people who were forced to attend residential schools in Canada. Residential schools are now widely recognized to have caused significant harm to children who attended them and their families across generations. A commission is an established group of experts dedicated to a specific investigative purpose. The TRC was an investigative commission established in 2007 as part of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, the largest class action settlement in Canadian history. The TRC's final report included 94 calls to action, which were recommendations to further reconciliation in Canada by dismantling the social and political constructs that continue to marginalize and oppress Indigenous peoples. Other similar commissions in Canada have included the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, RCAP, established in 1991 with the aim of investigating the relationship between Indigenous peoples in Canada, the Government of Canada, and society as a whole. This commission produced the Report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in 1996. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, which produced Reclaiming Power and Place, the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, as well as an interim report. No action has happened since this report was completed. The Public Inquiry Commission on Relations between Indigenous Peoples and Certain Public Services in Quebec, Listening, Reconciliation, and Progress, which resulted in a final report putting forward 142 measures. What are residential schools? Residential schools were established as a federal government effort in 1880 and operated largely by certain churches and religious organizations. According to the Government of Canada, the system was imposed on Indigenous peoples as part of a broad set of assimilation efforts to destroy their rich cultures and identities and to suppress their histories. The accounts of residential school survivors provide critical insight into the devastating experiences children had at residential schools and the long-term impact of these experiences not only on survivors, but also on their families, communities, and future generations. Intergenerational trauma, or trauma passed between generations, is still being dealt with by Indigenous communities. Throughout the system's history, Indigenous peoples fought against it in many ways. The efforts of residential school survivors to tell their stories and to seek justice have been a crucial catalyst in the growing public recognition of the harm and effects of residential schools. What experiences should I be aware of? In addition to residential schools, Indigenous people in Canada have been mistreated in a number of different ways by various institutions over time, ever since European settlers first arrived in Canada. Examples include the 60s scoop refers to a period between the years 1960 and the mid-1980s, where First Nation and Métis children were adopted in extremely high numbers, often taken from their homes and communities without the consent of families and bands. Still today, there are more Indigenous children in care than at the height of the residential school era. Inuit displacement occurred when the Government of Canada implemented the High Arctic Relocation Program in the 1950s, moving 87 Inuit across 7 families from one community in northern Quebec, Inukjuak, and 3 families from their traditional homes and hunting grounds in Pond Inlet, Nunavut, further north to what is now Grice Ford and Resolute, Nunavut. The federal government issued a formal apology for this relocation in summer 2010. These are recent history examples, in addition to Canada's longer history of colonialism, the effects are which are still being felt today. Why is truth and reconciliation needed? Understanding the history of colonization and the relationship the federal and provincial governments and their institutions have had and continue to have with Indigenous peoples is important context for anyone interpreting current news stories, understanding their colleagues and friends, and attempting to develop more inclusive workplaces. Indigenous communities continue to bring forward valuable grievances, and it's important to understand how these impact communities and individuals. It is equally important to understand that Indigenous communities, including urban Indigenous communities, are vibrant. Many Indigenous people are highly accomplished and successful, both within institutions shared across Canada and within Indigenous organizations or networks, and both within very public realms and smaller but equally important local contexts. Indigenous scholars, leaders, activists, politicians, artists, and more have made significant contributions in governance, politics, and policy development, law, social work, and other helping professions, medicine and other health professions, science, and other fields. Indigenous research methodologies and ethical frameworks have been developed both for qualitative and quantitative research. Indigenous elders, community members, youth, and children also contribute significantly to their own communities and beyond. In addition, Indigenous individuals and communities thrive by non-Western standards as well, from cultural, political, economic, artistic, and other perspectives. In many cases, these successes are doubly weighted as they represent not only a great contribution to society, but often also represent tremendous resilience and healing. Understanding and applying the principles of reconciliation helps support that Indigenous people and all Canadians have opportunity to contribute fully to their own lives, to the lives of those around them, and to the Canadian society. Indigenous people can live freely without carrying the weight of historical, generational traumas. Valuable knowledge and languages are not lost. What can I do about reconciliation? Read. Learn about Canada's history. Learn about the territory on which you live. Read the TRC's 94 calls to action and identify which of them you can apply. This may be worth reading at different stages in your career in case certain calls to action become applicable. Read the works of Indigenous scholars, writers, and journalists. Understand. Understand that each community is distinct and unique, and that multiple worldviews and experiences exist and are valid. Reflect. Identify and critically examine your own assumptions and ideas about Indigenous peoples, Canada's history, and critically think about your comments and ways of speaking about Indigenous people in Canada. Critically think about language used in any publications, social media, or other documents you produce on behalf of yourself or your organization. Recognize that your Indigenous peers may find reading or learning about their own histories even more difficult, as they can relate them to their own circumstances or family knowledge. Listen. When possible, listen to elders and community members about their past and current lived experiences and their recommendations. You can do this by attending workshops and meetings that are designed for you. Example, some events are designed for Indigenous people only. Others are designed primarily for allies. Others are designed specifically for learning about reconciliation. Others are designed to share information between groups. Listen to Indigenous voices across various domains: the arts, music, education, politics, etc. Build relationships. Conversations that may seem abstract about history, politics, current events, etc., may be deeply personal to a peer. It's important to build relationships before having discussions on such topics. Building strong relationships with anyone takes time, respect, care, and kindness. Engage. If possible, attend Indigenous events like a powwow. While some events are intended for a specific audience, others are open to the public and encourage attendance from non-Indigenous people. Look for information about such events on social media. Participate and take action. A number of different initiatives exist that you can participate in to commemorate, learn about, and take action on various issues and causes. Orange Shirt Day. Annually on September 30th, Canadians coast to coast wear orange-colored shirts in commemoration of the residential school experience. The orange shirts represent the story of Phyllis Jack Webstad, whose orange shirt given to her by her grandmother was taken from her on her first day at residential school at age 6. Every Child Matters. Coinciding with Orange Shirt Day, the NCTR organized a Reconciliation Through Education initiative that gathered tens of thousands of teachers and hundreds of thousands of students across Canada virtually on September 30th, 2020, to learn about residential schools directly from survivors. Have a Heart Day. This is a child and youth-led reconciliation event, supported by the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada, which involves a national gathering on Parliament Hill. The Caring Society uses a reconciliation framework to support equity for First Nations children and their families.